Chapter 24 The Road Home. Jenner and Tink stopped in their tracks and looked behind them, but beyond the lamplight, nothing. The moon. Chapter 24 The Road Home. Jenner and Tink stopped in their tracks and looked behind them, but beyond the lamplight, nothing. The moan floated to them again, and Tink's hands shook so violently that he dropped the lamp to the damp floor, where it snuffed out. That was all Tink could take. Squealing like a meep, he scrambled through the tunnel. Jenner hurried after him, cold fear shivering through his veins. He imagined 1,000 bony fingers clawing at his back, and flew up the stairs in 2 bounds. Tink was already at the top, wielding one of the old boards dangerously. Jenner wondered what Tink thought he would do with the plank if the ghost of Brimley Stoop actually did come whooshing at him, but he admired his brother's intentions, and snatched his own short, sturdy-looking plank from the woodpile. The long moan rose up out of the mouth of the passageway again as Jenner frantically tied the rope to the center of the board. Please, please work, he thought. He took aim and hurled the board through the doorway, noticing dimly that the horned hound was no longer there. He tugged on the rope, but the board clattered back to the floor. On the second try, Jenner jerked the rope so that the board was pulled flat against the doorframe. Praying that the beasts were long gone and that the plank would hold, he clambered up the wall and through the door. Jenner reached down from the opening. Tink, come on! He cried over the moaning that echoed in the black room. Tink tore his eyes from the tunnel opening to see that he was alone in the cellar. Ach! He cried as he tossed his board aside and scurried up the rope like a mad squirrel. He bypassed Jenner's hand and zipped up and through the door, where they both collapsed onto the floor, panting. Jenner kicked the plank and rope back into the cellar, thinking that it would be the best to remove as many traces of their presence as they could. Just being out of the dark cellar made Brimley Stoop seem less frightening, but now they had to contend with the horned hounds. The brothers crept back through the house and peeked out the front door, squinting in the brightness. The late afternoon sun was as warm and welcomed as life itself. Jenner scanned the edge of the forest for any signs of movement. I don't see them, he whispered. Tink's face was pale. Another chilling moan drifted up to them from the bowels of Ankle Jelly Manor. You ready? I've never been so ready, Tink breathed. Run! The Igby brothers ran past the stone bench, through the iron gate, down the long lane that sloped away from Ankle Jelly Manor and the border of the forest, and they didn't stop until they reached the field just behind the Blackest estate. Unable to move another step, they all lay sweating in the tall grass until they could breathe again. Then they rose to walk home, unable to believe that they were still alive and making solemn oaths to never again set foot in that horrid, wondrous place. Jenner and Tink approached the cottage in the late afternoon, just as Poto was walking down the lane with a wriggling sack over his shoulder. Lads, looks like the old Blackest boys beat you pretty smart again, did they? Poto eyed their filthy, sweaty clothes. Jenner and Tink each forced a laugh. Where are you off to? Jenner asked, changing the subject. Poto bent closer and put a hand to the side of his mouth. Don't tell your ma, unless she asks, of course, but all these thwops I've been snagging, see, I take 'em and I dump 'em in old Buzzard Willie's yard across town. Tee-hee-hee! Poto laughed, slapping his knee. That rascal never gave me a moment's peace when we were wee lads here in Glipwood, not to mention how he wooed sweet Myrna Bridgeholler right out from under me nose. And besides, Poto's white eyebrows bunched together, his totaters and sugarberries are always plumper than mine. He scratched his wild head of hair and muttered, I don't know how he does it. He held up the sack and whacked it happily, bringing forth a chorus of chatter from inside. So I'll see you lads a supper. Poto limped away toward Buzzard Willie's, whistling and twirling the sack as he went. Jenner and Tink stood side by side for a moment to watch Poto until he was out of sight. Then they made their way back to the cottage, grateful to be home again. But they were not the only ones watching. From behind a glipwood tree on the back lawn, Slarb the Fang squinted at Jenner and Tink entering their cottage. Slarb had been slinking around the Igby place all day, careful not to be seen. He had watched in agony, holding his hands to the side of his head while Lily practiced her whistle harp on the front porch. He had watched with loathing as Neo washed the clothes just outside the back door. And several times when Lily had played fetch with Nugget, it took all of Slarb's willpower to keep from snatching up the dog for once and for good. Even now, clacking his teeth in the shadow of a clipwood tree, he yearned to sink his teeth into anything Igby unfortunate enough to come near.